Good morning. I am Nicole Johnson, and I'm with the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. And I want to talk to you this morning about a concept that I have termed economics. And I initially put the first iteration of this presentation together for the Greater Naples Leadership class. And these are classes that engage the community in day-long sessions on different topic areas. And you would think maybe the Conservancy spoke at the Environment Day, and we did, but I was asked to speak at the Economic Development Day because the creators of the class felt that having the economy and environment discussed in the same day, in the same room, in the same program, was something that was very important. So there I am with the Chamber of Commerce and the Economic Development Director, and it became very apparent to everyone that the economic folks and the natural resources folks do not talk nearly enough. So my hope with this presentation is to get all of us thinking about this link between our economy, our environment, and our quality of life. Because, of course, this is the face of Southwest Florida. This is the picture that we want to portray. This is why many of us moved down to this area. But unfortunately, this is the other face of Southwest Florida. And the reality is that while we can agree that we don't like this, we don't want this, we cringe when some of these green algae pictures are in the New York Times or other big publications, we oftentimes really don't connect the fact that the decision makers, community leaders, when they're making these small decisions about how we need to move forward, it may be contributing to some of these ugly pictures of Southwest Florida that we really want to get rid of. Why is this? Again, I believe that we're not having that open dialogue, and those of us in the natural resources community, whether you're agency folks or nonprofits or community groups, really making sure that for the elected officials, community leaders, economic development folks, that they understand that our environment really is the golden egg for us. So this term economics, and I don't think anyone else has coined this. I was very proud of myself. I rarely come up with clever catchphrases. So this is the one and probably the last one that I'll have. But economics, what is it? And it's really looking at sort of this visualization of how we build Southwest Florida. And the Conservancy and other groups really feel that that bottom tier, that healthy environment, is going to be the foundation for everything else that we have here. Upon that foundation, and if it's not solid, the building is not going to stay structurally sound. But on that foundation, then, you have all of your elements of quality of life, robust tourism industry, economic diversification. And once you have all of that built properly, then you put that capstone at the top, that healthy economy. So the principles of economics, and I have a handout sheet in the back that has these principles listed. The first one, we live in an environmentally sensitive area. This isn't rocket science. It's actually really very simple, and I'm sure that all of you are aware of probably all of these principles. But I am always amazed at how many times you have someone who is trying to get a development project through, or a homeowner that wants to do something, and their complaint is the process down here in Southwest Florida is just unbelievably cumbersome. It's too long. Why does it take forever to get my permits? Well, this is one of the reasons. We live in an extremely environmentally sensitive area. So getting through the process is something that really takes a lot of review. But it's that high standard of review which helps maintain our high quality of life. So we are privileged to live here, and that is going to be one of the processes of that privilege. Principle 2, learn from past mistakes. That's a pretty good mantra, I think, for everything in life, but how often do we actually do that? We know that urban sprawl is bad, We know that if we build a town 20 miles outside of our urbanized area and then have to build roads to it, that's going to be a costly burden to the taxpayers. We know that baby boomers want a different type of development. They want to age in place. Are we creating developments that will accommodate those future needs? We really have to be looking at the past mistakes so that we can plan better for the future. And we have lots and lots of examples of past mistakes to look at. Anyone know where this is? Naples Park. And what was the problem here? They didn't account for stormwater. So what happens? All of that water is shunted into the bays and estuaries and has caused a lot of problems, and it's going to be a costly cleanup. Rotunda, again, you have these platted subdivisions, and it is costly to build your infrastructure out there, and who knows, if ever, that these will actually be built out. This is one of my favorites. Shorelines are dynamics. These are the dome houses that are down south of Marco Island. And while these have been kind of going into the water gradually over a number of years, this shows that within a week or so, those structures were completely out in the water because you had one tropical event, not even a hurricane, but a tropical storm come through. So our shorelines are quite dynamic. Principle 3, of course, it's better to do it right the first time than to have to go back and fix it. And probably Everglades restoration is the largest, most expensive, and most complex of examples for this principle. But Lake Trafford restoration is another one that I like to point out because the picture here, that's actually the surface of the lake. And it was completely choked with exotic vegetation. You had one spring day where the temperatures were just right. You had 50,000 fish go belly up in one day. You had the pea green soup look. So to take that and turn it into that, it can be done, but it took over 10 years of very strong lobbying efforts from the community. It cost over $21 million, and now we have to make sure that we're not still putting those pollution inputs in there to where in another decade or two we're going to have to go back and redo that whole project. Principle 4, thoughtful transportation planning saves money. It's really interesting. In the economic downturn, we found that one of our biggest allies is actually the Florida Department of Transportation. And why is that? Well, on the environmental side, we want to keep roads out of environmentally sensitive areas. On FDOT's side, they want to build roads in the most cost-efficient manner. And what we found, this is an example of a bypass around Immokalee in northern Collier County, and you have the lavender areas, which is primary panther habitat. The yellow areas are secondary panther habitat, and you find if you build the road all the way out to the east, you're cutting through a lot of wetlands and panther habitat. If you take it through town, you're really not impacting any habitat. Oh, and by the way, it's over twice as expensive to take it in the least environmentally compatible route out there. So we have actually formed some really good alliances with unlikely allies. Principle 5, of course, water is our most precious commodity. And the Conservancy every 5 years updates our estuaries report card. And what that shows is kind of a grade as to how our various estuarine water bodies are doing. And no surprise, year after year, they do continue to degrade in water quality. Nobody wants to have these pictures be what people think of as Southwest Florida's waters. But the problem is, if we allow current decision-making to keep going on its trajectory, it's going to be more and more of this. Principle 6, natural systems provide economic benefit. And I think that the environmental community has done a pretty good job of pointing these things out and also in quantifying not just the general concept of, yes, we know ecotourism, sports fishing, canoeing, kayaking, all of those things draw people to Southwest Florida. But we have now done studies that quantify exactly how much per acre of community benefit, jobs benefit, is produced by having various areas in public ownership. thought this one was interesting because it really shows how the natural systems are working for us in providing low-cost storm protection. This was a study that was done by the University of Iowa, and it looked at one island nation and how a series of storms hitting that island very differently affected the two countries that were there, Dominican Republic and Haiti. And what the study found was that there are a lot of factors that were involved in it, but in general, the Dominican Republic has saved a lot of their trees and their mangroves. Haiti, there's a tremendous amount of deforestation, and we find consistently that the impacts of destruction and death in Haiti are always much, much higher. And it's in part due to the fact that Haiti has not protected to the greatest extent possible their natural resources, their vegetation, their mangroves. So this really is nature's shield. And this is another good example, and it's a little hard to read, but essentially a study was done in one of the climate change journals last year that showed that, of course, the coastal areas are extremely vulnerable to storm damage. And what we're talking about, it's not millions, it's hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that our mangrove and estuarine systems are protecting. And you have, in this case scenario, and it's a little difficult to see, but this is the Clam Bay system. And this was right after Hurricane Wilma. And as you can see, the mangroves are pretty beat up, but they did their job. And the nice thing is, Pelican Bay was built behind the mangroves. They didn't build right on the beach. They allowed that estuarine system to remain. So you have this completely free defense system. And of course, the mangroves do pop back. But when you build closer and closer to the shoreline, you're not allowing yourself that free nature's shield. This one I wasn't completely aware of, but all of us, I think, are dealing with flood insurance issues because FEMA has redone their flood maps, and a lot of people who didn't think that they were in a flood zone got a rude awakening when they were told that they had to get very expensive flood insurance. But what we found is that FEMA takes into account if a county or a city has a significant amount of land in open space and in conservation. And 2020 has provided Lee County residents a significant decrease in those FEMA flood insurance rates. So that's something that I think we don't always think of, but really needs to be brought to the attention of decision makers. These natural lands are working for all of us. Town of Fort Myers Beach understands this, and they have been in the process of pursuing annexing Mound Key because they want that same benefit from those flood insurance rate decreases. Principle 9, regulation is important, and I could do a whole presentation on this one, but the bottom line is there's been an enormous contention since the recession that all of Florida's problems, or a vast majority of them, are because we have these onerous growth management laws and environmental regulations. And there have been many studies that have been done. One by the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission said no, that was absolutely not the case. But we have in the state over the past several years really rolled back and eliminated a lot of those important growth management and environmental laws and regulations. The problem is we are on our way to adding 1,000 additional people every day to the state of Florida, and we really have insignificant levels of protection, I would say, at the state level to address some of these issues. So we have to beef that up. We have to do a better job of that. Principle 10 is taking a long-term view of things. There's, I think, this desire to get economic stimulation going, jobs, 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 and that is something that's very important, but we have to make sure that we're not getting a short-term economic gain in exchange for long-term economic and quality of life devastating impacts. So we have to look at each decision that's being made by our decision makers. How is that going to impact not just jobs, but residents, visitors, future residents? And the last principle is one that I think is something that local governments and probably local government staffs can really beef up on and make a wonderful impact, knowing what you have and making it work better for you. I know that there were many governmental agencies and counties that were just green with envy when Lee County and the Estero community got HERTS. And everyone said, we need to be shovel ready so that we're ready for the next HERTS. But if you look at what the inventory is in many of the counties, you find you do actually have the space available. Most of it's zoned for commercial uses. It's just that when someone comes in and decides that they want to put a development in, they don't know where to go to find out what the inventory is, what it's zoned for, and how to start that process. And the result is that they turn to the easiest thing, which is looking to the rural lands and starting with a blank slate of either ag fields or open vegetated areas. So one of the things that we're recommending that the community and that local governments do is really take a hard look at what the inventory is. Are there platted lot areas that could be consolidated and turned into something more economically viable? I think Punta Gorda is a great example. After Hurricane Charlie came through, devastation in the downtown area, but the community came together, decided what would be the best way to rebuild, and it's a really wonderful, viable resource now. So, I think that having this harsh look at what's out there, if it needs to be modified and tweaked a little bit, that's fine. But let's not go the route of that easiest choice, which is looking east and putting these developments out into the rural areas, because we know that then leads to urban sprawl. And with that, the final message: in these difficult economic times, the most fiscally prudent course of action is often the most environmentally compatible. So that's our homework from this, is when we go out, when we interact with community leaders, when we interact with decision makers and elected officials, let's try to make that connection, because it's there. It isn't rocket science. It's just that they need to be reminded continually. Thank you. And I did leave 2.5 minutes for questions, if there are any.
Hey, Nicole.
Hey.
Have you had a chance to present this to any sitting elected officials or any people that are in charge of land use planning and get their feedback? And how have they received that?
I haven't yet, but I think that would be a really good idea. As I said, when I presented this at the Economic Development Day, everyone was just stunned, because it was the chamber and the economic development director. They really had never even thought that they should be talking to the Conservancy about this. So I think it is something good that in one-on-one meetings presenting to county commissioners, I think that's a good idea, and maybe as a public presentation. Okay, thank you.